Longest day of the year.
Hey, Newt.
Hey,
Is that you
you
live
hearing
on
me?
spot? Yeah, I can hear you.
On spot down here. I'm down at the Orman Ranch, this horse and stable campsite in Crescent City here.
Where is that at? Up South Slough?
In Crescent
Oh,
City.
Crescent City. You're way down there. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Hey, Shannon.
Good morning, Sam.
Pretty quiet crew this morning.
Got it.
I don't blame him. It's super nice outside. I don't know where everybody else is at right now. Well, except for Newt. He's down in Crescent City. It is gorgeous in the Coos.
Oh, good. I'm
Yeah.
envious. It's pretty up here on Puget Sound today also.
Pretty.
Yeah, it's one of those days when it feels like you're inside a pearl. We've got like a high fog, but it's warm and sunny in here.
Oh, nice. Cool. Well,
Cool.
I'll be standing by.
Alrighty.
People in.
Hey, Sam, would you mind letting me share screen?
Absolutely. Let me see. Options. Did that do it?
Let's see. Yes, I'm in. Thank you. Okay, cool. Well, we'll just cruise on. Please just unmute mute yourself. I mean, obviously, this is a pretty intimate meeting. There's all five of us. So just speak up. If you've got something to say, this is more of a workshop format. Just wanted to give kind of an update, run through what the comment context and overview and discussion is for the existing open comment period for Oregon's call areas. Touch base on what our engagement planning is. We've significantly refined that since we had our meeting in the first quarter of 22. We had a much more aggressive plan. And then just touch base on a couple of updates. We've been trying to get our socioeconomic analysis funded. So we've got a couple new directions that we're going there. So just for level setting, the existing call for information and nominations has kind of two parts to it. In general, they're reaching out to anybody who would be affected, and that's where Ocean fits in to provide some input and comments and information. And then there's another part of it that's really focusing on understanding what the industry interest is in blocks within those call areas for the potential for development. This is really this sentence here regarding a competitive lease or a non-competitive lease. A non-competitive lease would just be if there was only interest expressed from one member of industry for a block, i.e. there's no competition for that. We are expecting a competitive lease like we've been seeing on the Eastern Seaboard, and it's planned for California coming up pretty soon here. We've got 7 days left. Our environmental crew has been working really hard on this and has a nice draft for us that we're going to go through. This is just talking about the two different sections that the call is requesting information. And that section 6 is what the nominations would be. Which of those blocks within the existing call areas is industry nominating for inclusion in the wind energy areas that will go out to bid in 2023. Here's the Coos Bay call area. Recall that back in January, I believe, Governor Brown submitted some comments to BOEM before they finalized these call areas. And one of those suggestions All of those suggestions really aligned with Ocean's input. So that was good to see that our influence is playing out. There was an additional suggestion, though, that was included there, that the easternmost border of the call areas not be closer than 12 nautical miles from shore. So you see that reflected in both of these. So this one is obviously right off of Coos Bay and really designed to tap into the transmission points of interconnection that Governor Brown also recommended they focus these call areas around. But totally, there's about 10.6 gigawatts of capacity there. So if we were to take our state planning goal of 3 gigawatts and say it's only going to happen in the Coos Bay call area, we're looking at less than a third of this total area. Put this up here because there has been a lot of comment and conversation about developing at 1,300 meters or deeper. There's kind of a faint dotted line here. That's the 1,300 meter line. So if we were to actually put the calls out so that all of the installations were deeper than 1,300 meters, we would need to start over this entire process. It's about 3 years to get us to where we are today. Because as you can see, there's a little bit that's over 1,300 meters. In fact, some of those depths get down to 1,500 meters, but they're just little slivers that do have some potential for development, is what I'm hearing from industry. And industry is suggesting that BOEM keep these existing call areas, but go ahead and watch this nomination process. I believe we'll see these easternmost blocks nominated, especially those that border on or intersect these flat areas, adjacent flat areas there. The red, again, that's where it's really steep. It's just not possible to anchor into those steep slopes. Another reason that there's been concern about pushing everything out to deeper than 1,300 meters, specifically for Oregon, is, as you can see here, all of this red slope, by the time we actually get down to something that flattens out again, we're looking at over 3,000 meters. So it's quite the jump to respond to that request. Here's the Brookings call. More of the same, but it's quite a bit smaller. So if we were to run a scenario where maybe all of Oregon's 3 by 30 is developed in the Brookings call, it would pretty much take up the whole thing. There's 3.5 gigawatts capacity down there. It is a higher efficiency, higher production area. And there is talk about thinking about this Brookings call area as adjacent to the Del Norte call area that could occur just on the other side of the border. So they would essentially be one continuous area. Taking a look at within the Brookings area, you also see that it's a bit more attractive in terms of its flatlands, but not really, again, an opportunity to look at depths deeper than 1,300 meters unless we get out here to 3,200 meters. This is just a list of all of the different topics that BOEM is asking for input on, and I just highlighted the areas that Ocean has been focusing on. So in our draft comments right now, we start up by saying that we support the existing leasing timeline. We should move forward for 2023 as a climate imperative, and also because our state and region need electrons. We're going to quickly run out of electricity here, folks. So we need this. The request for publication of factors, we've been asking this for 2.5, 3 years, ever since we started this conversation, wondering what are those factors and how do they relatively weigh out in BOEM's decision-making for where these wind energy areas are. You can recall that last September, we invited NOAA's marine spatial planning folks to show us the tool that they have that does a really good job of increasing the transparency and saying, okay, what are the factors for this little block of space and how are we weighing the relative values of, for example, high value fishing and high value renewable resource. We also suggested that they convene some public meetings because of course we don't know exactly what the technology would look like to be deployed, but we've got a pretty good idea. Industry kind of knows where they're heading, and industry members are very much willing to talk about that, or at least to provide information to NREL so that NREL could then, in kind of a more confidential way, give us the state of play for the technology and what that might look like. Is there potential to develop that so that some types of fishing, i.e. long lining, might be viable in those areas? We've also suggested, our environmental group has been doing awesome work. This is a concept that has been presented to BOEM and they're quite amenable to it. Instead of a programmatic EIS, which others have been calling for, which would substantially slow down the process and I think more importantly, not provide the information that they want. We presented this alternate preliminary cumulative effects assessment. And again, you see this concept of looking at Oregon's southern, at the cumulative impacts of developing Oregon's southern Brookings call with that Northern California call, because they really are one and the same, continuous at the end of the day. We have our recommendations for visual simulations. You can find on BOEM's website the simulations they did for California down in the Humboldt area, as well as off of Monterey. And they're really helpful for providing context. I think those were at 15 nautical miles. So we've requested that like right now, maybe next week, they do the same thing for a couple of points off of Oregon's coast. Right now, we've got the 12 nautical mile shoreside limit. So go ahead and do that. And we've also suggested that maybe for comparison, they look at 17 nautical miles as well. Recommendations for seabed morphology and substrate analysis, as well as a reconsideration of that shoreward limit and a conversation about that. What was the rationale there? We will also be taking this opportunity to reiterate the previous input that we provided. BOEM there was a Port of Coos Bay feasibility study that was funded by industry and Business Oregon that was released earlier this year. That implied that that dredging would occur for some other projects, the port expansion project that it has been introduced as a concept and may be receiving some federal funding. And we specifically asked that the other feasibility study that is currently funded by BOEM and will be released, I believe, in November of this year about the Port of Coos Bay. We want them to identify the potential services that the Port of Coos Bay could provide that don't require channel widening, i.e. dredging and deepening. We know that that is very much a high priority concern for community members and want to understand the roles that we could play in Coos Bay without taking that step. When we recently hosted industry, offshore wind industry down, we had tours of all of the available lands out on the Port of Coos Bay. And we noticed that out at Roseburg Forest Products, they've got lots of quayside. They're very interested in renting that out. And there's also additional adjacent space there that's already maintained at 37.5 feet deep. There's a former paper mill there that might have a good potential use for renewable hydrogen electrolysis. And if we go up under the bridge, Tribal One, the Coquel Wharf, that's 37.5 feet. I learned is not maintained by dredging. It's by virtue of where that resides in the natural hydromorphology of the bay. So that's a pretty interesting opportunity there too. Of course, you could not stand something up there because you couldn't get out underneath the bridge, but interesting to understand what could be done there. We also asked that they identify high traffic safety considerations. For example, our Dungeness season is in the winter. It's already extremely dangerous. We lose lives almost every single season. And to think about our Dungeness fleet having to wait for additional traffic to get over that bar during the limited periods of time that they can make it across, especially when they're fully loaded. That's definitely something we want to be thinking about right now and how to mitigate that. We also asked that in addition to looking directly at the infrastructure opportunities for supporting the offshore wind industry in recognition of our sustainable seafood industry that also uses that port, to look at potential infrastructure strengthening opportunities there in Charleston that could support our local fishing fleet and reduce potentially safety risks. We suggested that they facilitate some industry outreach, industries being primarily the fishing industry and offshore wind, really get them down to sit at the table. The offshore wind industry is oh so happy to do so, continues to offer that, and we continue to work with our other colleagues to see in what conditions the fishing industry might be comfortable doing that and figure out what resources would be needed to support that conversation. Our socioeconomic analysis that would determine the real costs and benefits. Those quotes come from a letter that was drafted by the Coastal Caucus regarding this call area. And that was concerned that offshore wind costs and benefits were not being appropriately conjectured upon, I guess, forecast. That's the word I'm looking for. Of course, we have been asking for this to be done for, gosh, now 2 years, and it's been 18 months that we've had a scope and budget that we've been shopping around. And that they facilitate stakeholder collaboration so we can think about some coexistent solutions using readily available tools. Of course, there's compensatory mitigation, but ahead of that, what kind of lease provisions could limit those conflicts so there's not as much to mitigate at the end? And how can we invest in that conflict reduction? Multi-factor bids, that should be not bibs, and investigating opportunities for dual use by design, i.e. could we fish within these wind arrays? Definitely not bottom trawling, that would be out of the question, but long lining, there's potential there. So how could we look at coexistence by transforming which fisheries are harvested within the wind farm areas that we know from global experience will experience a proliferation of fish. Regarding that last point, looking just south of the border in California, BOEM issued some concepts around how they might structure that upcoming lease, and there's an open comment period for that. I think it's August 6th is when that closes, so we could consider some comments there as well. But just taking what we see down south of the border and then extrapolating how that might play out if we were to see similar lease language up here in Oregon. And we kind of provided some brackets around what the lease bids might come in at based on what we saw in New York and Carolina for the auctions. So the Carolina, that's the low price. And a medium price was to take the average of New York and Carolina. New York was so high, it doesn't make sense for us. That seems like it would be overly optimistic in terms of receipts. But if we were to look at that 2.5% for community benefit that they've established and opened up for comment down in California, those would be the implications for Oregon. for the 3 gigawatt, somewhere between 17 and $36 million. We're also asking the question of what if that wasn't 2.5%, but what if it was 5%? Is that a thing? In our verbal conversations with BOEM leadership in San Francisco and in their presentations at the Pacific Offshore Wind Conference, they were very clear, and that's what we have seen, that their intention is to continue to build upon and strengthen their lease provisions in response to the state's priorities. So we see this as an excellent opportunity for the state to convene those stakeholders to sit down and talk about this. I was invited to a huddle with the organized union labor leaders on Friday. That was organized by Blue Green Alliance, and they're certainly thinking along these lines. So we'd encourage the fishing industry to do the same. I believe those are all of our draft comments for BOEM. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions, concerns? Cool, you're all like, no, I just want to get outside, it's beautiful. So touching base on our engagement, previously we had a really aggressive engagement strategy with the hopes that we would be able to secure the funding and resources necessary to do so. In pivoting to reflect the resources that we do have, which currently are volunteer-based, and in recognition of the excellent job that our colleagues at Rogue Climate have been doing, they've also been growing in their resources and are specifically focusing on this. They will have a community BOEM call area workshop that they're hosting this evening. We've decided to back their play. They're doing a great job there. So we will shift into focusing on our strengths, which really are networking and think tanking solutions, curating some relevant subject matter expert presentations in our webinars as we have in the past, just as we're listening to what the priorities or concerns or questions are, respond to those with information and resources as we can. And also to build upon what we learned at the Offshore Wind Industry Fly-In. We did have some excellent experience with Surfrider leadership taking a bus ride with the industry members. Industry was really appreciative of that. It was an open, frank conversation about where the pinch points and conflicts are going to be. And Surfrider leadership was good enough to invite industry to come and meet with local chapters, if whenever they would like to. Same out at Oregon Institute of Marine Biology. We'd like to continue the conversation and the listening, specifically with the tribes and fishers, about what process and what conditions would make them more comfortable to participate in some more facilitated stakeholder relationship building. And this is just kind of a high level overview of that scope that we put together with help from the consulting industry for our socioeconomic analysis. We did submit this back in the fall to the Maritime Blue group for their EDA funding. They were funded, they got the green light for the first half of that to put together a full package. They're going for a couple $2 billion. They have strong support from Washington's Department of Commerce. I met with their leadership last week up in Portland. They're very excited about the scope of work, and we're now working with this consortium to kind of do an expanded scope that looks at the entire Pacific Northwest with respect to floating offshore wind and renewable hydrogen. University of Washington, Port of Seattle, and Port of Tacoma have all kicked in 50 grand and are doing kind of their own nuanced. Of course, Ports of Seattle and Tacoma are going to focus on that phase 4, really. I think phase 3 and 4, what roles could they play once we've established what these scenarios look like? And UW is really looking at how to do a better job of what we're trying to do here, which is really look at the equity aspects of this socioeconomic analysis, but it's more from a research aspect and not quite so boots on the ground like we're doing. Renewable Northwest also picked up our scope and started talking to the Clean Power Association. That's a national trade organization of the, I can't remember if it's just offshore wind, it might be terrestrial and offshore wind. So they're contemplating funding our scope. If they were to do so, that would be awesome because they're ready to go right now. So if that is the case, then we would hopefully work with Renewable Northwest to get as much of those first aspects, maybe phases 1 through 3 funded. And then that would allow the Maritime Blue folks and hopefully more folks down on this side of the border to prepare their funding to really do the deep delve on how do we optimize our deployments scenarios to maximize those benefits. We've already provided this to Oregon Solutions, although I think now they're seeing the value of it because this has been requested from the fishing industry as well. So who knows, maybe we'll get a pivot turn. To that end, we have requested of Governor Brown's office that she prioritize assigning Oregon Solutions, not only to fund this work, but to facilitate those conversations with the fishing industry for our lease provisions ASAP. And I think that's all I've got, folks. Anyone have anything else?
Shannon, I'm curious, what you mentioned Governor Brown having sort of, well, certainly being lobbied to put more focus on this. It seems that the state still hasn't quite got its act together yet to at least explore it deeply, much less support it strongly. Am I just not seeing it, or is it not coming as way it should be?
It's not coming the way it should be. Both the funding of this and the facilitation. However, I do think that the value of that Coastal Caucus letter is that they did request this analysis. They made the call. What are the real costs and benefits? So, you know, we've reiterated this. Like maybe I think that now they will see that as a solution. Poet has been talking to BOEM about how do we get funding for the facilitation of, you know, the facilitation piece around the lease provisions. And it sounds like BOEM is amenable and can find the funding, but they need the state to take the lead. So been talking to DLCD about that, and also suggesting through Governor Brown's office that Oregon Solutions be assigned that task. We have new leadership at DLCD. She's just getting situated. She does recognize that the clean energy aspect, the scope of that agency has dramatically grown, and that needs to be one of her first priorities. So either one of those seems to be a good fit. It's now down to getting one of those either that agency or the governor's office to make that a priority, and kind of kicking the tires on that with the fishing industry. Will you show up and participate? If it's Oregon Solutions or if it's DLCD, or if not, where would you show up and participate?
That's some critical issues there. That's good.
And I guess while
Okay,
this
so we got
Newt, was that you?
yeah. I was gonna say, I guess we need to continue talking to the fishermen and stuff and seeing how we can fold it and make things happen.
Yeah, I appreciated your suggestion about, just you walking the docks, talking to folks.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I think if we want to get to fishermen around here, we need to spread it at the docks there, and at least let them know that, you know,
Oh shoot, I can't hear you, Newt.
He's splitting up.
Darn it. Newt, you've broken up. But yeah, I think I know where you were going to just really get out there and walk the docks, meet people where they're at. As a somewhat related and a little bit more fun levity topic, I know that there's been some interest in revisiting Oktoberfish this year. That might be a nice opportunity to also reach out to Rogue Climate and others and see if they'd like to have a presence and get some more people talking and thinking about this in that space.
Shannon, this is Bill. One of the things I'm curious about is the message that I don't think has gotten out, and it's the simple question of why. Why are we bothering to do industrialization of the coast? Why are we bothering to do something off Brookings through Coos Bay down to, through Crescent City all the way down to Mendocino? Why not someplace else? And the science behind the impacts to the ocean really don't seem to have been entered into any of this discussion. And I think that's an issue that needs to be explained to the extent that people are willing to listen. And that's where having Newt and Sam or others that can go and talk one-on-one with people and explain that the changes are happening and we need to act quickly, but act smartly, and recognizing, as you've said many times, as we learned from the East Coast, now's the time to start asking for things. I'm not even asking, it's demanding. So the talks that I heard from the fishermen were saying, well, what's in it for me? And absolutely, now's the time to be asking for that, and not just say, oh, we're not going to get anything. Say, no, we want our part. So.
Yeah, that's excellent. So it sounds like you've kind of framed up what the talking pieces are. Newt had suggested like something to leave behind with information or some follow-up. And if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like what the first part is, why are we doing this? Department of Energy has done a great job of putting that message together, but it could be distilled down and just made really clear, like, because we need electrons. It's not because BOEM wants to make money, it's because we need electrons.
Yeah.
And two, you should be like here, you should get something out of this. What might you get out of it? How can you participate? How can you think about that?
And I think one of the things that I try to emphasize is that there are plenty of other places to get electricity, which includes coal-fired power plants. But there's all sorts of reasons why we don't want to do that. And a lot of them have to do with impacts to our oceans and the acidification, the heating up, the changes to the wind, all those things, because as you know, my background is in marine biology and I've studied all these things out here, and I'm really, really worried about what those impacts are going to be to my ocean. And so that I don't think has really been conveyed to the people, to the fishers especially, to say, if it weren't for that, I wouldn't be that keen to go, mess up my view, mess up my ocean, mess up the animals that I care about. but it's a completely different world right now, and we all have to be, it's all hands on deck. And that's why I think that we need to get that message out so people understand what's at stake.
Back to what Newt was talking about, walking the docks, out in the fishing communities themselves. And then with regard to BOEM's call areas and this comment period ending just here in about a week, what other agencies or institutions or methods would fishermen actually be able to influence the conversation to maximize those benefits for those communities, like say the fishing communities, after this BOEM call area period comment period ends? Do we have a good read on that?
Yeah, it's so once this BOEM call comment period ends, really encouraging them to think about and talk about and articulate what are the lease provisions, what do they want out of it, what are there infrastructure needs. We've heard from the seafood processing plants, they've got these DEQ permits that are really expensive, the upgrades for them. Is that something that doesn't help the fishermen? What do they need? Are there communications up to snuff? Are there gear changes? Is there a potential? Is that even a thing? If there was an area that previously it was a deep water trawl, high value area that was recognized that they wouldn't be able to trawl through, is there an opportunity to transition to long lining in that area?
Exactly. Shannon,
Yeah.
and then who would steer that conversation? I mean, is that something we would work with, say, Nick Edwards with and trying to identify those types of transitions when these call areas have after this period ends? And then is BOEM, is that the government that would come up with funds to re-rig, re-gear existing commercial fishing fleets to change how they use the ocean if it's in conflict with floating offshore wind?
Well, what we've seen, if California is an indicator, which I believe it is, I'll go back over to this slide here and explain it a little bit more. The community benefit, if you look at the narrative and the description in the California proposal, they're specifically targeting that to the fishing community for those types of things. So ostensibly that was because they heard that, hey, we need to swap out our gear, we need better communications. So that 2.5% for community benefit would be that $17 to $36 million that would come through the lease bids. So that would be a part of the lease bid payment. And that's where we were wondering, we know that the fishing, we've kind of got a flip-flop. Down in California, the tribes have been really engaged and very organized, and the fishing community has not been as much of a factor. I hope I didn't say that wrong, but that's what I have heard from many people. So we're wondering, well, we've kind of got this flip-flop up here. The tribes haven't been very engaged, but the fishing community has been super engaged. And that's why we were wondering about kind of socializing this concept of taking that 2.5% and making it 5% for the fishing community.
Great, thank you.
And with respect, the other question about who is it and how do they do it? We've heard repeatedly that Pacific Fisheries Management Council is that's vetted and by the various different, gear types and fisheries all up and down the Pacific coast. And they have their co-chairs, which are Susan Chambers and Mike O. Susan Chambers is based right there in Coos Bay. So that's great, but they're the co-chairs of their offshore wind. So those foreseeably, those two would be the lead negotiators and responsible for reaching out to the individual ports and gear types to make sure folks, we've both on the conflict minimization side, but also on this mitigation side.
Sam, one thing that I had looked into a little bit more was, excuse me, but it was the radar. And the National Academy of Sciences did a very recent study within the last several months, and they validated that, in fact, the radar that most people use was designed in the World War II. There's newer stuff coming out, and that would seem to be the sort of thing, if it was a designated pot of money to upgrade the radar for the fishermen, would be very valuable for everybody. And it goes beyond just fishing use for finding the gear out there, but it's also safety for the Coast Guard. So that seems like the sort of thing that would be, it's a point that people have brought up, that, well, we don't know about this. Actually, it has been studied, and they're good, a good use of money. So, and that would be applicable anywhere, much less either side of the US, anywhere in the world.
I've got one of those World War II era radar systems in my fishing boat as well.
You people don't have anything, better than that. That's the state of the art, sort of.
It's good stuff. No, it's solid state,
Yeah.
And it works in most scenarios.
Yeah, it doesn't work in the midst of the array. That's what we heard from the fisherman from Scotland.
Yep.
Right.
So, but there are workarounds, and that would be another thing that would be a good application of federal money, because it applies everywhere. And there is going to be proliferation of offshore wind and floating offshore wind. So it's got tremendous application, but it seems like low-hanging fruit from the standpoint of something that could be addressed relatively easy relative to a whole lot of other.
Yeah, I think looking at well, it depends on what our lease prices are, but I think we should be encouraging folks to think about a 5% community benefit, because you can burn through that money fast. That's a lot of boats, and especially if you start thinking about so that's for the fishing fleet, and then for the seafood processors, if indeed it is to update their wastewater treatment systems, which I understand that those preliminary estimates are coming in the $1 million+ and that's tough for the seafood processors. But if that was included in there, then even just that package, the radar communications and the wastewater treatment upgrades, and it seems like that's a great benefit, environmental benefit in and of itself, that everyone's brought up to code and we end up with higher water quality. But you could burn through that money fast.
Especially with the increase of everything right now is getting astronomical. And then you throw maritime on there, and then it doubles in price immediately.
Mm.
Well, one thing I don't know if you've heard any buzz about there, a lot of fishermen and sailors, people in the water in general, they use an AIS positioning system, and you can track boats, you can track your friend's boats. It's like an app, you put it on your phone, or you can have it running off a more powerful computer on your boat. But I would imagine that each one of these, platforms, units, offshore, floating offshore turbines would have a pretty dead set position that's not going to change. So those points, those coordinates can be pretty easily put into any chart plotter, and then fishermen will know exactly where they're at and where they're at in relation to their vessel. I don't really see that as a huge hurdle. I don't know what's going on over in Scotland if they're using that technology, but it's pretty basic. A lot of folks just have it right on their cell phones.
Cool.
And recognize that because if we're talking 1,300 or more meters of water, they will be pushed by the currents and winds a little bit. So it's not like they're fixed to the bottom to have a very precise location. But you're right, that sort of everything will be relative to one another. So that adds a little level of uncertainty to it. But it also means that I'm sure that the people that can figure out where your cell phone is in the midst of the middle of New York City, they can do some pretty sophisticated analyses and get rid of a lot of the issues of uncertainty. So.
Right. Yeah. You have a little positioning system on each one of these structures, and you'd be able to see things as they move, and what the currents are doing and how they're getting pushed, and what kind of like motions they're making. And I think that would be really, really easy to track, especially considering the finances, the huge level of finances to produce these things in general. That's like a no-brainer add-on.
Yeah, as you're talking about it makes me think that there's a concern that has been expressed about the loss of the research opportunities that these arrays would have to NOAA or to the other researchers. But in fact, we would have dozens and dozens of fixed observation platforms and recording platforms. So it would be a change. We could end up having massive increased amount of data collection for a whole lot of things that you can't do existingly with existing systems. So having that kind of benefits that the leaseholders or the operators are going to be supporting would be part of that early discussions and lease conditions, ultimate conditions for granting their construction operation plans.
Yeah. Thanks for that. One more thing, Shannon, a quick question. Was there another deadline you had mentioned? Was it the Build Back Better thing, July 7th?
No, actually, you are thinking about the Community Renewable Energy Program. Yes. That grant, that first round of grant intake periods, correct. It closes on July 7th.
Okay. Maybe I'd like to touch bases with you, but maybe we can do that offline.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, if it's okay with you, Poet is publishing a one-pager on California's lease provisions, but with this lens to angle on, hey, Oregon, we should be thinking about this. If it's all right with you, I'll include some of these concepts that we talked about. These types of activities, for example, could be included.
I would strongly support that. It's a great idea.
You're talking about in the comment for BOEM?
Actually, what we're building that to submit, to get out to all of the different organizations that are thinking about offshore wind. It could be something that could be one of those leave behinds if you or Newt are walking docks and talking to people. that, you know, embeds some references for people, gets them thinking about this concept. So it's kind of a multi-purpose leave page, if you will.
Absolutely. Yeah. Toss it our way.
I think,
Cool.
so this is Nora. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
So I just think you should read that over very carefully, as though you are a fisherman reading this, and see if there are any red flags in there that Poet is including to talk to a wider audience that would be seen as really antagonistic by the fishermen who are on edge about this to begin with.
that's a great point. You know, I should have that draft completed by tomorrow's environmental. Maybe y'all, if y'all have a chance to look at it. Newt, Sam, folks.
Great. Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon.
Cool. Okay, so you want to get outside?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Go do it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, so much.
Happy
Thanks, everyone.
solstice. Happy summer.
And
Yeah,
Enjoy this long day.
yes. I'll see
And
some of
Shannon-
you tomorrow.
if you have a chance, you want to give me a call, I can tell you about my report for road climate this afternoon or this evening.
Oh, okay, will do. Thank you, Bill.
Yep.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.